YouTube intro here because we're obviously recording this and this is going to go out onto YouTube. Thank all of you for being here. Let's get rolling on that really quickly. Hey everyone, Anthony Fantano here, internet's busiest music nerd. Hope you are doing well. We are here for a momentous interview, one that came up quite suddenly when our guest reached out and contacted me, asking if I was interested in having this conversation. I most definitely am. We have Mr. Sean Ono Lennon guesting with us.
What's up, fam? How you doing?
I'm good. He's guesting with us live on Twitch. We're going to predominantly be talking about this new compilation of music from his father, John Lennon. Give Me Some Truth. He passed me this awesome collection of CDs. It's the other way. Oh, the other way.
Oh.
It's the other way. There it is. This collection of CDs, LPs, a book as well. I've been scoping it out. I've been reading it. I've been listening to it. The material on here has some new ultimate mixes as well, which I want to get into. It's a couple hours of material, right? We have a few hours of your father's stuff.
Yeah, I mean
here.
the running time is it's 4 LPs. That's kind of how I was thinking of it. But we tried to keep it a short enough time per side that the quality was high, because we also did a vinyl master for the vinyl. Yeah. So to me, that was what we were doing. We were making a compilation for vinyl, and then the CD and the other stuff is there, but that was secondary in my mind.
All right. Let me get into my first question here. So your father is one of the most heavily compiled artists of the modern era. What exactly drives you to do another compilation, another collection of tracks here, especially considering it's following the previous Give Me Some Truth back in 2010, sure, which, totaled even more tracks, so what exactly was the driving force behind doing another one?
Well, first of all, I can't answer to what other compilations were about, or the fact that one was called Give Me Some Truth. I mean, that didn't involve me. And when it came time to doing this one, which we really needed to do because the 80th anniversary was kind of a big deal. People were looking forward to it, and we needed a way to sort of celebrate his music. And enough time had sort of passed that I think not just my dad, but a lot of artists that I used to sort of just take for granted were in the ether, like we're in the consciousness of young people and everyone. I don't think that's as true anymore. So I feel like, we have a duty to keep his music and art out there, only because I think it's important work. And I think, the first time around, his songs really helped people, arguably, at least culture. I think they were a significant contribution to culture. And so I don't think we can afford to lose that contribution. So I think it's important to keep it out there. In terms of other compilations, I can't really speak to those because it was before my time, as it were. And in terms of the title, Give Me Some Truth, I did realize that there was another compilation called Give Me Some Truth, but it just didn't seem like a significant compilation. And given the climate of the world, that song and that title seemed really relevant right now. So I sort of, part of me wishes it hadn't already been used as a compilation title, but I wasn't going to make a decision based on that because I think this is a much more important and sort of total project that encompasses, his entire career. And it's more monumental, this project, marking the anniversary and everything. So yeah, I mean, just quickly to answer to people who are kind of, saying, why would you remix his stuff? Or why do you have to put it out again? The original mixes were great. I mean, I totally agree. I have nothing against the original mixes, most of them anyway. There's a couple that are questionable. But generally, the motivation in doing these mixes and doing this compilation wasn't to sort of write the past or change the past or replace the old ones. It's really, we need to celebrate his anniversary. And I also feel like it's important. I really feel like I have a duty to try and help keep him in the consciousness to a degree. He's not here to do that, People like Elton and Queen, they have their movies and stuff. And I think I have a duty to his work and to people generally. I think his work is important to be a part of the canon of Western culture, or not of global culture, musical culture. So yeah, I feel like I have a duty, and it seemed like an important moment to mark.
Speaking of that duty, I know that you didn't literally just wake up this morning, Sean Ono Lennon, but in the process of coming together with this and doing these mixes, did it in any way feel surreal to be a part of this process and be so closely connected to it in a personal way?
I mean, surreal, I don't know if I'd use that word exactly, but sort of overwhelming, intimidating, and really personally pretty emotional, especially when I got around to Double Fantasy, because that's the record that they were making when I was basically crawling around on the floor. But I mean, I remember, taking naps on the couch and stuff while they were making that record. So I have memories of that time, and that's also the record they were making when he died. So it's not a record that I listen to that much because of that. It's sort of very emotional. And when I was a kid, I listened to it a lot. It was also on the radio. It was a #1 record, so every cab had it. It was playing everywhere. And whenever I listened to that album, it's sort of like a time capsule for what's a pretty traumatic period in my life. So that was a tough one to tackle. But it sounds cheesy, but ultimately I would say it was kind of cathartic, or it was a healthy process for me personally to just be forced to go back and listen to them. And it was tough, I have to be honest, at some points. But yeah, it wasn't surreal. It just felt like I didn't want to mess it up. I didn't want to upset people with how it was done. I was hoping people would like the mixes. And now I'm greatly relieved that for the most part, it's been a pretty positive reaction.
What can you tell us about your creative process in terms of culminating and choosing what made it onto the compilation and what didn't? Because, I mean, as everyone knows, there are previous Lennon compilations that literally compile everything from nearly all the studio stuff to home recordings and so on and so forth. I mean, what are you doing on this collection of tracks? Are you giving people the hits, or are you in a way trying to almost craft an image of an artist and kind of give people everything they need to know about him and just sort of know him in a way through his music?
Well, I feel like my vision or my perception of what this project is, the messaging might not exactly align with everyone else involved. I mean, I have my own personal feeling about it. We went into the project with this series of ultimate mixes, quote unquote, which to me implies that they're the greatest mixes or the last or both. And so I never really looked at them that way because it just seemed like too much for me to deal with. I mean, it was hard enough to just do good new mixes that people would like. And that goes the same for the selection of songs. I wasn't trying to do something that was the ultimate selection in a sort of platonic, perfect universe of John Lennon's solo career. I was trying to give everyone the most popular songs for the most part, but then also make sure to sort of diversify, at least with the deluxe versions, which have more songs, I think 38 in total. I wanted to give a couple of lesser known tracks like Angela we put on there. And I don't think any compilation had really done that before, unless it was a complete thing. But I sort of tried to split the difference and satisfy the most nerdiest, musicologist, John Lennon fans with interesting selections, and then also introduce a new generation to what's probably his most likable solo songs, but then also leave some out because, the records are there. It's supposed to be a gateway to the albums and not something to supplement or to replace them in any way.
So in terms of your philosophy when it came to leaving off or not highlighting certain tracks, it's more of a case of like, this may not be sort of functional as kind of a gateway to certain records or certain eras of his solo catalog?
Well, what I wanted to do is do something that was a chronology that sort of encompassed his whole solo career. So a retrospective, I guess they call it, right? So I couldn't I wanted to make sure there was, you know, a couple of songs from every record, so you could kind of get an overview of the whole career. And so that in itself means that you're not just selecting the hits or whatever you think the most commercial songs or the best songs are. It's more about giving a representative array of the full palette of his work. So yeah, I mean, that's what I was hoping for. So I wasn't thinking so much ultimate. I mean, the word ultimate's in there, but that wasn't my frame of mind. Let's put it that way, because I wanted to sort of to be more like a gateway to his work.
Was there anything that you went with on this comp or didn't go with by reason of maybe the messaging wouldn't land modern day, or maybe there'd be some kind of controversy around the messaging of the song? I mean, you know, just to reference to How Do You Sleep, for example. I mean,
talking about.
Yeah, well, I'm just saying, you know, you just quickly using How Do You Sleep as an example, the bad blood behind that track, as it were. Sure. Which, I mean, you know, at this point, it's a song that many fans of the Beatles and Lennon and even McCartney love. But
well, it's funny because I did hesitate with that song, and it's, you know, it's because I have only love and respect for Paul, and obviously he was a quarter of my favorite band in history, so I wouldn't want to offend him. But there is a funny story that one of the first times I kind of hung out with him when I was old enough to, I guess, engage in conversation. I was such a dumb, precocious, I guess, preteen that I remember just jumping into right away, like, what do you think of How Do You Sleep? Yeah, like an idiot. Like, isn't it a good song? And I totally regret that. I look back on that moment in a cringy way. And, you know, he was nice about it, but it was clear that it wasn't like the best foot forward. So I was a little nervous about putting it on. But for me, the thing about that song is it's just so absolutely great musically. I mean, I don't think I could have left it off. And then in terms of the beef aspect, if I sort of remove myself from being the family or something, that in itself is pretty fascinating, I think. You know, the sort of the invention of the hip hop beef or something, you know, because Paul put out a song called Too Many People that I think my dad took as being a bit of a snarky commentary on him and my mom. And so my dad responded with How Do You Sleep? I don't know if everyone knows that, but so, yeah, I think it's an interesting history, but I was nervous to make a short story long.
Let's get into the mixing and mastering process a little bit, and maybe some of the subtle alterations that have been made to these songs. I mean, there are certainly some tracks on this compilation that, to me, sonically, they sound like very lightly touched up versions of the originals, like maybe a little more shimmery, maybe a little brighter, or maybe like subtly louder in a way. But you know, there were some other moments, to kind of go back to a Double Fantasy. You know, Woman for me stood out as being one of the clearest examples. There's like a lot less of a, I guess what you could call like an 80s sheen on it, the guitars and the vocals. And on top of it, it sounds like there's been some alterations to the background vocals too. Like they're not as in your face.
Yeah. Well, I knew you would notice stuff like that because you're a musician, and you know, it's there for everyone to hear. So I was a little nervous about people being offended by.
Well, let me say, I do love that record, and I do feel like it's a little underrated. You know,
well, it may be underrated now, but I just mean in terms of the backing vocals and stuff.
But I will not say I was not offended by the changes. I thought they were interesting.
Sure. I'm sure you're not. It's more some imaginary fan at home, you know, screaming at the sky, "How dare that Lennon kid!"
Well, you know, it made the whole thing sound a lot cleaner. You know, it sort of like gave it a new vibe.
Well, look, I was really trying my best working with Paul Hicks, who's this amazing engineer who did the actual technical mixing, and I was overseeing it or helping, however you'd call it. And because this music means so much to me and the project means so much to me, I couldn't help in certain situations, and Woman is one of them, to just make a pretty bold decision, like we're going to turn this down in a way that it's not turned down in the original, because I really think the song will benefit from that. So I guess it's sort of a production choice. But again, that's why I have to be honest that I don't consider it like the definitive, perfect, ultimate, whatever, anything. It's more just a project of a labor of love that I really wanted to work on to try to make the best decisions possible. So yes, I did turn down, and you're the first person to notice it. I turned down the backing vocals because I felt like they were a bit, I'm sorry, I'll just be honest with you. I felt like they were a bit hokey to be happening so strongly the whole time, but I thought they were really beautiful if they entered and exited more at the right time. That's just a personal subjective choice. And I know it's sacrilegious because the music is considered, this masterclass work. I guess in that way, I was taking advantage of the fact that I'm the son and I can, I'm the only one maybe who could ask for that to happen and people would be like, all right, we'll do it. So yeah, maybe I was taking advantage of nepotism in that way, but I couldn't resist those kinds of decisions because I felt passionately about them. And I do think there's a couple other things you might notice, like on Grow Old With Me, I wound up having to do a kind of hybrid of all these 3 different versions, which were all demos really, and I made some decisions there arrangement wise that hadn't been before. And I didn't do them out of ego or anything. I really was just struggling with trying to represent the music in the best way possible. And I hope that comes across. And again, the old versions are all there. So it's not like anything we did is eliminating anything else.
Yeah, especially in the age of streaming where you can really listen to it all as you please. I mean, there's nothing, necessarily sacrificed by making creative changes like that. Especially as, I know what you're talking about in terms of changing things and the weight that weighs on you doing that, but it's an incredibly subtle change. It's one that I had to go back, and re-listen and listen to the new and the old a few times over just to make sure I was hearing what I was hearing, but honestly, like the moment I realized it was there, I was like, okay, he really wanted it to flourish a certain way on the chorus, and the vocals appearing there and not appearing in other places makes that happen. So I mean,
exactly.
Honestly, I thought it was a smart choice.
Thank you. I'm really glad that you noticed it. And there's a couple things like that are subjective, but I was never as much of a fan of the sort of flagrant use of horns from my dad in the sort of mid 70s. So there are a couple of songs that I maybe won't even mention specifically where we turned down a couple of horn parts here and there a little bit. And I just felt like they served the music better. I felt like, at least for a modern ear, for a contemporaneous ear, that they might not have triggered the same emotions, that kind of like, angry rock and roll saxophone player or something.
Yeah.
So I mean, I tended to turn those down a little bit because I think they didn't hold up to the test of time as much as the songs themselves. So there were a couple of decisions like that, and I was terrified. I mean, I'm even starting to sweat now talking about it because I just feel like, I didn't want to get in trouble, but I also couldn't help myself because I feel passionately about little things like that in mixing.
No, I mean, things have changed since then. I think sort of like hearing your dad in a new light, and hearing that material in a new light where it's not sounding quite as much like, I don't know, like the opening to an SNL episode, it's sort of like changing that and sort of like making it a little more timeless in a way. I think made sense.
Thank you. That means a lot because it's an area that I don't lead with, to be honest. But I had a feeling you'd know.
I think it's a good mix of sort of liberties being taken with the mixes on the compilation. It's to go back to the recent series of Beatles remixes that occurred. It reminds me of sort of like a bit of a split between Abbey Road and the White Album. On Abbey Road, like there was a little bit of compression added in. There were so few changes to much of anything that I noticed. Meanwhile, there are some re-alterations and remixes on White Album that are just so whacked. Where, you're hearing things that you didn't even notice before, like a lot louder or a lot crazier. So there wasn't anything on the record that stood out to me as being like, whoa, that's like too huge of a change, or the vibe is totally lost now. So
great. Well, thank you.
I appreciate that.
In terms of the Beatles stuff, Giles does an amazing job. And actually Paul, who did these mixes, has helped on some of those earlier Beatles remixes with Giles. And he's, it's interesting because he's also the son of, we share the same birthday. And it's interesting that he literally has sort of been put in charge of remixing all of his dad's productions with the Beatles. And, it's something I relate to, the pressure that he deals with very well and graceful. And I think he does a great job. And obviously not everyone's going to agree with every choice that he makes, but, I think overall he does a pretty remarkable job considering, the pressure of it all,
Next, I wanted to ask you a question of perspective, a perspective that I've been dying to sort of hear for a while. Because over the past 10 years, as I've kind of been online reviewing music, being a part of many music discussions, I've gotten into numerous fights over your mother's music and sort of defending that and defending sort of the relevance of it, how groundbreaking a lot of it was, how much talent it required, how much vision it required. I mean, what is it like for you personally to be a part of this incredible split in rock history where there's such a gap of appreciation between what your father did artistically and what your mother did artistically in music and performance art and beyond? And obviously, like, their artistic trajectories intertwine so deeply in your father's own discography, and she's an essential part of this compilation. So, I mean, generally, thoughts on people not really fully appreciating, your mother's musical perception, in terms of her ability to influence punk, indie, alternative dance, art pop. Go.
Sure. Well, firstly, let me say, I knew I liked you, Fantano. I knew it. I grew up more immersed in my mother's music than my dad's because my dad wasn't around. My mom was making records. I wound up touring in her band when I was like a teenager still. I saw her make like 5 or 6 or 7 albums with like serious producers in studios. So I learned what a mixing console was. I learned compression. I learned microphones. I learned delay, everything from my mom producing records. So it actually took me a while to catch up with understanding where people are coming from. Like, it took me longer because I thought that was just kind of cool. She obviously has a very alternative vocal style. She has kind of 2 hats that she wears. There's the super avant-garde early Plastic Ono Band stuff where she's just like screaming her ass off, which I think Marshall McLuhan talked about as the birth of punk rock, actually, her first Plastic Ono Band album in 1971. And then she has the other hat that she wears, which is a pop songwriter. And I actually think she's a very underrated pop songwriter objectively. I think for a long time, until recently, people didn't accept that she produced the Imagine album and wrote the song Imagine with my dad. I think people heard rumors of that, or they knew that she was credited as a producer on Imagine, but they just sort of assumed because of a confluence of things, the fact that she's a woman, the fact that she's, odd and avant-garde, they sort of assumed that she was just given a sort of a credit, a gestural credit that wasn't real. But the truth is, she did produce one of the most successful albums of all time. She co-wrote one of the most successful songs of all time, Imagine. So just on an objective level, you can't really argue with those creds, right? And if you watch the footage of How Do You Sleep being recorded and the Imagine album, you see my dad is asking her every single moment. He's like, what do you think, Yoko? What do you think? And she's like, I think you should turn the bass down. I think that he's playing too loud, whatever. She's obviously telling him what to do. So you can say you like her or you don't. But if you like the Imagine record, which many people seem to because it was very, successful and still is to this day, then she is a great record producer at the least. And, she's one of the most successful songwriters if you consider that she wrote Imagine with my dad, which she did. And she was recently given the credit for. So yeah, I think I'm sorry if this is a long answer, but
this is the answer and the validation that I personally want as somebody who's had this opinion for a long time. I mean, not even just a fan of the stuff that you're talking about, but also a fan of some of her solo works and singles, like Walking on Thin Ice, for example. Like, that song is an incredible dance song, and like what that track preceded as well. Like there were so many like alternative and weird and super like groovy dance influences and sounds on that were so alternative for the time, and aesthetics that would be adopted pretty like quickly, in the oncoming years.
Yeah. I mean, and she was influential. The B-52s did Rock Lobster and had a kind of homage to her vocal style that my dad actually noticed and pointed out to her. And yeah, I mean, Tony Levin's playing bass on Walking on Thin Ice. I mean, he's like the legend, who played with the later King Crimson. And my dad's guitar playing on Walking on Thin Ice is, I think, my dad said was his favorite guitar he'd ever played. It's this kind of thing.
Yeah.
And he was very proud of that. And yes, look, I really think you probably have to have alternative taste or like, underground taste, or have sympathy for alternative culture to get really into all of her records. But I mean, I'm an indie kid, so, because my mom's a Yoko Ono, but I also grew up playing in more indie bands, and, I was on Grand Royal, the Beasties label, which was pretty indie vibes, musically speaking. So yeah, I love those records. I produced 2 records with my mom. I think she's great, but I know she's not for everyone. And the older I get, the more I realize, like, okay, when I listen to the way she vocalizes, sometimes I'm like, I see how that doesn't, how it doesn't appeal to a lot of people, because in my view, they have a more conservative taste. But my favorite Miles Davis records are, Big Fun, On the Corner, Bitches Brew, and Live Evil, which, at the time, I think those were a shock to the kind of blues fans, but I like out music. So yeah, for me, it's cool, but I also totally have empathy and understanding for those who for whom it's not their cup of tea.
And one more thing before I go on to the next question, just for further frame of reference of the influence, our next guest who we're going to be talking to, alternative and experimental hip hop trio Clipping. I don't know how familiar you are with their work, but their new record, the final song on it is a take on your mother's Secret Piece performance.
Oh, that's so cool! I gotta check them out. I haven't yet. I feel embarrassed now, but I will check them out.
No, don't be embarrassed. Not everybody hears everything, but it's just interesting to know. Like, they literally tried to follow the rules of the process piece, as it were, and then sort of do their own version for the end of their album. So
the real truth is also, when I was talking about learning from watching her make records, I really did learn how to mix from her. I mean, so she may have a very avant-garde, John Cage influenced, wild kind of guttural vocal style, but she also is a very like legitimately good mixer. And I don't know why that is. Maybe it's just because she learned to make records around probably the best producers and engineers in the world with my dad. So she definitely knows what she's doing when it comes to just a legitimate mix. And she taught me pretty much everything I know that wasn't self-taught. I learned from her in terms of like where the vocal sits in a mix, like really technical stuff. So yeah, she knows what she's doing.
Going into the themes of your father's solo work, especially on this compilation, I mean, he seemed like a man who was very consumed with God, with love, with peace, with emotional struggles internally. How do you feel like a lot of that messaging has, aged over the years? How does it sort of fit into 2020 in the context of this year?
Well, honestly, I think it's such a cliche, but with him, it's probably more true than of most artists of his generation. He was ahead of his time. I mean, my mom and dad sort of famously, or at least it was famous to my generation, filmed themselves every day for like 5 years or something from the Imagine period on. That's why there's a great film called Imagine John Lennon. There's a lot of that footage in there when they were living in England. And, it's not all like really great footage. It's him, taking a bath. It's him eating toast, and making toast. It's like reality TV or something. And they had this kind of philosophy where they wanted to be an open book. They famously posed naked on the cover of Two Virgins, which no one really wanted to see necessarily. But the idea was to stop with artifice, to stop with the artifice. And if you listen to my dad's first solo album, Plastic Ono Band, the John Lennon version, it's remarkably personal. I mean, it's remarkably open and sort of warts and all, and just bearing the most intimate, personal feelings that anyone could have. He's screaming about it, and I think it was very innovative. In fact, I think it was uncomfortable for a lot of people. It probably still is to this day, but I think now it's sort of, it actually has aged very well. That aspect of my dad's work, the kind of, digging deep and being open about your flaws and your insecurities and your greatest fears, I actually think is very contemporary now. I think it's a lot more accepted, and not just because people are understanding of mental health and all that cool stuff in terms of being open and understanding, but in terms of art. I mean, whether it's reality TV or Instagram or, people that just sort of film themselves every day, taking selfies in their bathroom mirror. There's this culture of showing it all. And, people go into surgery and they're still filming on Instagram Live or something. And so I do think that it sort of fits in really well with that sort of frame of mind of, I think people are tired of artifice. I think kids are definitely wary of like people who are totally full of shit now. Whereas, in the 80s and a lot of in the 90s too, there was this sort of, I don't know, there was sort of a worship of the artifice of some actors and pop stars. And I think people are kind of tired of that. They don't take celebrities as seriously anymore. There's not this sort of, worshiping celebrities like they're gods. It's sort of like you want to see how human they are, like with Kanye, like we know he struggles with bipolar or whatever. And, I know people are mad at him about certain things, but generally I think he's a good example of someone who doesn't have an invincible exterior. We kind of know what's up, what his marriage problems and all that. And yes, that I think John and Yoko definitely sort of pioneered that kind of thing for sure. No one else was doing it when they started that. Believe me, they weren't.
Yeah, there was certainly a lot of spectacle. And not to say that what your dad and your mom were doing was weird. I mean, it was a spectacle because it was so unorthodox, for the time. But it seems like there was a lot of spectacle made over just how unlikely as a celebrity couple they were, and how much of their energy went into using that platform to sort of break down, sort of the pedestal that I think, that they had been hoisted onto. And, I mean, certainly the after effects of it are felt at this point. But I don't even know if you could say if in their own time, while they were together, did they successfully totally tear it down, but you're right.
Well, it's interesting also when you talk about how does it fit into the modern world. If you include my mom in this question, it's really interesting because she was really ahead of her time in terms of, feminism. And then they were really ahead of their time in terms of being a very mainstream multiracial couple, which, doesn't seem like a big deal so much today. But at the time it was completely shocking. I mean, people don't realize what England was like, sort of post Second World War England. The Beatles were shocking enough because their bangs were down here. That was like, oh my God, how could you have such long hair? You're savages, And so when my mom and dad got together, it was like, it was overtly said at times, terrible things. But even it was just the subtext was like, how could he go off with his Jap? I mean, it really, that was the subtext. The Japs were the enemy of the Second World War. And that was really pioneering, groundbreaking. And I think it's sort of, whether people today are aware that was a catharsis for a lot of the stuff that's happening now, it doesn't matter because it paved the way for a lot of consciousness, race consciousness, feminine consciousness. It really did.
Yeah, I mean, I think, certainly there's a lot of, collective attempts to try to gain perspective on just how far and little socially we've come since about the era, that the Beatles were, recording their most popular records. But, for frame of reference, at least in the US anyway, I know it must have not even been, I think, 15 years to 20 years before, probably even Revolver, Rubber Soul. I think interracial marriages had been legalized in the U.S. Previously, they had been illegal. So, I mean, we're not really talking about.
I think there were some states later than others.
It's
misogyny. I think it's called misogyny or something.
That's probably the case. But again, it's like we're not talking about a far gap of time, and I think there's not, as much bigotry as there is now that's trying to be fought against today. I mean, it's it's worth sort of considering just like how much, I guess, more intense in some respects,
I think 100% you're correct. I think, whether or not you make the analysis that we haven't come far or we have come far, it's sort of a glass half full, half empty statement, meaning they're both true, depending on what part of your analysis we're looking at. But I think what's important is to not just make assumptions and to try to see things in the context of history, especially recent history, because it's, we've got footage. It's not like we have to read cuneiform tablets or something. We can see what happened in those days. And I do think some people are less curious and realistic about the degree to which we're sort of riding on the shoulders of those generations and continuing the progress as opposed to just starting from scratch or something, which I don't believe is true.
All right, before we head out, we're going to take a few fan questions. We've gotten quite a few thrown at us over here, and I'll try to get to as many essentials as we can. Oh, hey, it's Ted asks a pretty straightforward one right off the bat. They want to know, is there more Claypool, Lennon Delirium stuff coming down the pipe, in the works, planned anytime soon?
Well, first of all, let me say hi, Ted. Thanks for asking. We definitely plan to do more Delirium stuff, but it's been like everyone else. We've been, put aside for COVID, and, Les lives in, my bandmate. For those who don't know, Les Claypool from Primus and I have a band called The Delirium, and he lives in San Francisco. We tend to make, well, not San Francisco, but near there. We tend to make our records at his studio. And so I haven't been able to make the trip over there because, we both have just been adjusting to 3-4 tours being canceled. We don't know when we're going to be on the road again, and I think that goes for everybody for the most part. But yes, I would love to make another record, but we don't know when because everything's sort of on hold.
Truzit asks an interesting question. Did you personally always love the Beatles' music, or have there been phases in your life where you've wrestled with enjoyment of that, or maybe had a different perspective on it because of, your proximity to all of that? I mean, I'm sort of adding a little bit here, but, much in the same way that you maybe talk about double fantasy in a way.
I have to be honest. Like, I wish that I could be cool or edgy enough to be like, yeah, like I went through a period where like I really hated Meet the Beatles or something, but I don't know, man. I grew up listening to that music, and I wouldn't play one note of music if it wasn't for those records. And I'm definitely biased. I don't think any band is as amazing as the Beatles. You look at them making basically 2 records a year for 8 years. To make one of those albums would be an accomplishment for 99.9% of bands.
Plus, on top of that, you're adding the promo stuff, the movies.
The movies, yeah. Well, I count the movies as like, with the Yellow Submarine's soundtrack and Magical Mystery Tour. But the amount of the prolificness of the career is incredible. And then if you add to the fact that pretty much every record sort of changed the entire scene of music, of rock and roll, and not just of music, but the culture, like the hippie culture, or the 60s culture, the swinging culture, whatever you want to call it, they were literally transforming the scene with every record. And you can hear the biggest bands of the time completely changing their style. Her Majesty's Satanic Request comes out after Sgt. Pepper. So, it's pretty monumental. There are no Beatles records I don't like. there may be a couple songs I like less than other songs. I'd have to go through a real list. But no, I wish I was edgier, but I'm not. I like the early Beatles records a lot even. You know, they may be less profound or less edgy, but they're shockingly good considering most bands didn't even write their own songs at the time, you know?
Just out of personal curiosity, your, I guess, experience sort of having your own intimate moments with the music and learning about it and educating yourself about it or being educated about it. I mean, what was that process like from your perspective? Was that sort of a history that you had to go through on your own accord and sort of like gain that knowledge on your own? Or was it sort of bestowed upon you firsthand? Like when you were kind of experiencing this music, was it in a private moment or was it literally like, hey, we made this music, listen to some of it?
Well, I'd say both. I mean, there's actually recordings of my dad, I think, telling me about, I forget which song it is, but he doesn't even, he actually, it's funny because he doesn't remember the title. And he's like, I'm like, what are you saying in that one? You're like, what's that? What are the lyrics? And he's like, I think we're saying goodbye with a little help from me. What's that song called? Like, he doesn't remember. But yeah, I mean, he loved the Beatles songs. Like, he would play them all the time. But I will say that now that you ask me this on live internet television, I actually realized that maybe if my dad had been around, I would have been more rebellious, possibly. You know, the figure in my house who made all those songs and wrote all those records and it was telling me to come home early or not letting me go to that party or something. I may have had more of a rebellious streak. But because my dad wasn't around, it sounds sappy, but it was sort of my only way of connecting with him or like continuing a relationship with him was to sort of listen to the music and learn it and become a musician, learn how to sing and play the songs. That was literally the closest I had to continuing a relationship with my dad. So now that I think of it, I'm certain that's why. And I'm sure I would have rebelled against him if he'd been around to rebel against, but he just wasn't. So my relationship was a lot more kind of sacred, I guess. It's a little goofy to put it that way, but I think that's the truth.
Toffee M asks an interesting one. Okay. I don't know if you've put out a take about this already. Maybe you have, but do you have any thoughts on the Twitter video of celebrities singing Imagine? And just as kind of like a personal question, just as a personal question, do you feel like that song, or rather that video, and maybe other instances as well, are kind of like an indication of people enjoying the music? They love the sound of it. They love the tune, but they're not necessarily like fully understanding the message and what your father and your mother were getting at when they were kind of trying to put that song across conceptually?
Okay. This is a it's a complicated topic, I would say, because the song is very interesting to me. It's very interesting because I normally wouldn't like that kind of song. I normally don't like that kind of song. And what I mean by that kind of song, I mean it's the sort of the song where a celebrity or a famous rock star is kind of telling us how to think politically or something, or has like a message about something deep. Like it's not as, it usually feels condescending. Often I just feel like, oh, what do you know? Or, I don't want to hear that from you. That's how I normally feel. There's something about Imagine that doesn't make me feel that way. And it's not just because of my dad writing it. And because I will say there's other songs where he doesn't deliver it in the same way, that kind of message. It doesn't bother me at all. And I've really thought about this a lot. Like, why is it so cool? Like he says it, he sings it, and it just feels like, yeah, I'm on board. I don't know what you're saying, but I'm on board. And I've thought about this a lot. And maybe you guys didn't ask for an essay on the subject.
Give us the essay.
But I think it has to do with his personality being obviously cynical as hell. He's not just sort of, like, oh, everything is great. He's one of the most cynical people. So you kind of give him that break. You're like, all right, well, what are you saying here? Because I know you're not a cheeseball, right? And then the other thing is he's not making it about his ego. I hear a lot of people, and I don't want to criticize anyone, directly, specifically. But you know, when sometimes when people cover the song, they're like, "Imagine all the people, oh yeah," and you're just like, dude, I hate this song now. I actually hate it. Why do you hate it? Because it's like, you know, because it's somebody kind of making it about their singing or some shit or whatever. Their guitar solo, whatever. You know, it's so humble the way he sings it.
Yeah, it's very quiet.
He just kind of says it. He says it in a way that's like, you know, I'm not going to make a big deal out of this. This is what I think. I really mean it right now. It's like conversational. So I actually think, yes, it's like this sweet spot that he found. And I don't think it's easy to find that sweet spot. I think it has to do with being him. I think it has to do with the performance. I think it has to do with cosmic alignment of a moment in time. So I don't think anyone really covers that song very well. Maybe there are some. I remember hearing Tracy Chapman do it once and thinking it was kind of nice. But generally, so whether it's, you know, Hollywood celebrities who, honestly, does anyone give a fuck about Hollywood celebrities anymore? Or, you know, or some really great singer belting it. It all just seems a bit hokey to me. And it's not because they're bad people. It's because the song inherently was already walking on that edge. It's already on that edge of like, this kind of song can be kind of hokey, right? Yeah. So that's my feeling. It has to do with very nuanced, specific things that allow that song to sort of transcend in ways that a lot of other songs and performances don't. Does that make sense?
No, I think it does. And I think, you know, that preachiness that you're talking about, that the song sort of approaches but doesn't necessarily breach, like that could be that could occur with just a few lyric changes. You know what I mean? But instead, the framing of the song is less telling you what to think and more inviting you to consider this, you know, consider if this was the case, consider if that was the case. Just give it a think, you know.
Exactly. It's very
existential. And in that way, it's gentle.
Yes, and it's very contemplative. It's not forcing it down your throat, lyrically or performance-wise. So yeah, I mean, obviously, I don't know. I hate being cynical, but it's very hard to like get down for me when famous people get behind any sort of politically hot topic. It can feel really cringe. You know, I remember in the 80s, I'm not going to point anyone out specifically, but there were a lot of moments where you're just like, man, you know, I don't want to hear it from you. I don't know why. Maybe I'm a dick. I'm just a dick. But, you know, usually I don't want to hear it, you know? So that's all I'm going to say.
You know, we're nearing the end here. I just wanted to say, like, for contrast, just because I find your take on this topic interesting, like, you know, how far does a song contrast in tone from Imagine, like, let's say, for example, Serve Yourself, like the home recording of Serve Yourself, for example, because obviously that in terms of like vocal tone, delivery, what your father thinks, and the fact that's kind of another popular, you know, sort of like legendary Beef-esque song as well.
Yeah, because he was responding to Dylan kind of being born again. Yeah, I mean, look, I think that's a perfect example of why the sort of yin-yang balance of the context of Imagine works, because, you know, even if you're not actively listening to those other songs, you're listening to someone who's capable of doing How Do You Sleep, or even Give Me Some Truth, which is sort of Imagine with edge, you know? It's really about my dad's personality. I guess ultimately I would reduce it to that. And he had a very unique personality. You know, even for example, him becoming a strong feminist. It was really powerful because he was kind of a macho guy and he was a tough guy. So I think all of the power of it comes from him, you know, not being some really like cheesy spiritual, like, you know, person singing Imagine. It was him. It was cynical John Lennon singing Imagine, and that made it more powerful. That's what I would say.
Well, Sean Ono Lennon, you have been a fantastic guest. You've been
Thanks,
an open
man.
book. You've been nice. You've been kind. You've been talkative. You've been great. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks, man. I really appreciate it. I wanted to do this with you because I'm a fan of the show. So I appreciate you letting me come on.
Well, we're a fan of you as well, and I'm a fan that you
brother.
just came on here and just spit some fucking facts. You came through
That was
here
all
and
in
just,
rhyme too. It's
you were
amazing.
You really shed some light on a lot of stuff, and we appreciate it.
Thanks, man. It's always good to see you. Take care.
All right. Have a good one.
Bye.